Okay, now we look into some potential source of error when we have certain way of thinking, like heuristics in thinking about the social world, or we call social cognition. Okay, I mentioned in the previous recording about optimism bias. Sometimes when you have certain way of thinking through automatic process way of thinking, there is a risk that you overlook certain information. Okay, and then you become optimistic about what you want to achieve, for example. So um, the implication of having this optimism bias is overconfidence, meaning that when you are optimistic, you tend to be very overconfident, confident about what you want to do, because you do not take into consideration certain information that is reasonable in making certain decision making or in making certain judgment. So while having this way of thinking of heuristic, of course there are some errors of omission. Okay, so let us look into an example of our real life when we use optimism. Yeah, so try and think about your past life. Okay, remember your life during your childhood period, and then your teenage period, and now recently you face with COVID-19, for example. Why don't you reflect about the things that occur in your life at the past? Okay, you may have a period down to the valley, you may have ups and downs, you may have a very long periods of downs down to the valley, or you may have long bouts of happy moments in your life. So each one of you may have a different experience when you think about your past. And then if you use this automatic process of thinking, you might want to think about certain information that available in your mind or resemble with what you have in your mind, or you might just want to use status quo, or you may want to use bargaining and anchoring. Now, imagine your future when you want to make decision about your life. If you use this optimism bias, okay, if you overlook certain information, you may look into your life as very optimistic, very bright future ahead of you, and you feel good about yourself, and you start to think about all the positive things that happens in your life. If only you take necessary information in your mind, information that is suit to you, information that you like to know or you like to have in your mind. So that comes into this optimism. So when you have this overly optimistic way of thinking, you have the tendency to deal with planning fallacy. Okay, what is planning fallacy? Planning fallacy is the tendency to make optimistic prediction that concern about how long a given task will take for completion. In order to you complete a task, when you have a tendency to be very optimistic, you fail to think about the struggles and the challenges that you may face when you want to complete certain tasks. For example, if I give you a work, an assignment to come up with a social experiment, so you said that, oh, this assignment is not that difficult, just want to come up with movie, or you do it at a certain place, you just use these apps, and then you just cut here and paste here and cut there and paste there. So that's it, voila, your work will finish. But during the process of doing this social experiment, you fail to provide certain timeline in terms of how to communicate this with your group member, because you're not doing it alone. So these are the challenges that you might be facing when you want to complete your social experiment. So maybe you have the tendency to come up with an unrealistic to-do list, okay, when you want to finish your social experiment, causing you to want to start doing it later, of the semester because you find that this job may be very easy. Okay, so this unrealistic to-do list, you want to do it later, last minute of the semester, because sometimes you just want to focus on the future. Maybe you are having a lack of motivation to complete the task. Maybe you don't like your group member, for example, or you may not have power to decide. So you are the follower and you just want to follow what the leader want to say, and you don't really want to bother about having to do the experiment or the assignment. So basically, when you have this optimism bias, you tend to do certain things very last minutely, okay, because you may think that everything will be fine, for example. Okay, and in case, for example, if you are not succeed in completing the assignment, you will come to this point where you think about counterfactual thinking. Kalaulah kita buat awal-awal hari tu, mesti social experiment kita ni lagi best daripada kumpulan B contohnya. So basically, human, we have this cognition, we have this thinking, we are cognitive creatures. We have the capacity to not only examine what has happened, but we also examine what could have happened. So this is what we call counterfactual thinking. Kalaulah. Okay, this is what refers to the tendency to imagine other outcomes in a situation that the ones that actually occurred. What might have been? What might have been if we start this experiment early? What might have been if we discuss this and then we plan this appropriately? What might have been if we have discussed and we have prepared the master plan before we want to finish this assignment? So this kind of counterfactual thinking always occur in humans, okay, and this is our enemy basically. So this is usually occur when you express sympathy towards someone who fell victim of accident, cases of rape, and for example, not only that, you also express this kind of concern towards yourself to, to sedapkan hati, to persuade yourself, okay. Like for example, if only sometimes when you conduct a counseling session, please do not use this. If only you could have come to me earlier, for example. If only we could start doing this assignment earlier. If only we could study harder for abnormal psychology or introduction to psychology. If only the illness had been diagnosed sooner, I will not be as sick as this right now. So basically, this is what happened when we use heuristics. Through our automatic process thinking, we tend to face certain pitfalls. Okay, and these pitfalls is resulting different types of errors like optimism bias, confidence barrier, and error of omission. Okay, and counterfactual thinking can sometimes help us to perform better. If you ask yourself this question of counterfactual thinking, you may imagine how we might have done better. Before the things occur, you try ask your questions regularly with your group member, for example, or with yourself, self-reflecting. Okay, by imagining how we might have done better, we may have come up with improved strategies and ways of using our effort more effectively, or you may feel more positively about what is happening. So when you reflect, okay, do some reflection about what might have been occur, it can also reduce your dissatisfaction about what have been occurred. So these are way of dealing with failure due to optimism bias. Sometimes we also use magical thinking. In our social cognition, we don't, besides using heuristics, we also use magical thinking, which involved assumptions that do not hold up to rational scrutiny, but share similarity or resemblance one another. So, for example, in terms of thinking about the social world, in the class, if I want to call your names to answer question, you might want to say in your mind that you try to avoid thinking that your name will be called, for example. All right. Or have you ever think about feeling that you are the reason that the Malaysian team to lose in a soccer game if you watch the game, for example? Or maybe someone offered you a piece of chocolate shape, but it's shaped like a lizard or a snake. Would you eat it? So this kind of magical thinking also influence your social cognition. There are some errors in this way of thinking. Okay, besides counterfactual thinking, our social cognition also involve magical thinking about making decision to do certain things. So basically, that is what I want to highlight about potential sources of error in social cognition. Now, I want you to look at your past, okay, your past life, about the journey that you have gone through in your life. Which one is more, your optimistic life or your pessimistic life, that influence your plan in the future? Why don't you write it down, then we can share it in the next class.